Our next speaker is Steve Wesley, the founder and managing partner of the Wesley Group, Sustainability Venture Fund. And Wesley was also previously the controller and chief fiscal officer for the state of California. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm joined by an associate, Sean, who's going to throw up a few slides for us. I just want to say that Bob's presentation was outstanding, and it really went deep on the science. And my background's a little different, and I'm going to go up to perhaps 20 or 30,000 square feet. I teach, aside from running a venture capital fund and having served as the chief financial officer of the state of California, I also teach a course at Stanford called the Technology, Politics, and Finance for Solving Global Warming. And the thesis, as you can guess, is that it's not just enough to understand the technology, but you have to fit it together with the politics and with the finance to create the reality of changing, getting the planet to carbon net neutral. So Sean, launch into the first slide here. I love starting here because it tells a bit of my personal story. I actually, when I graduated from Stanford decades ago, I made a beeline to the Department of Energy, worked in the Office of Conservation in solar at the very first Department of Energy when people barely knew what conservation or solar was. I'm not fooling. The cost of solar was $77 a watt. And while everybody thought solar was great in the future, simply put, it was so far out of the money, it just didn't go anywhere for decades. That was in 1977. And what you see here is the cost curve coming down over the next 30 years. Everybody was waiting for solar to take off. And parenthetically, in 2007, I started this venture firm to raise our first fund. We're now on Fund 5. And at that moment in time, we made this forecast that solar, because the cost had come down so much from $77 a watt to about $3 a watt, was going to grow from essentially nothing, less than a gigawatt, to 15 gigawatts over 10 years. And what did people say? Crazy Californians. But Sean, go ahead and show them what really happened. As the cost went down, it grew like that and continued on. If we could get this in scale, it would go above the ceiling of the building. The growth has been so high. And I just wanted to stop and say what's a challenge is it's easy to think things are going to grow in an orderly, predictable, linear way, and they usually don't. You have to look for the inflection point, whether it's solar, lithium-ion batteries, electric vehicles, not the trend line, but the inflection point. So, Sean, next slide. This one is one of my favorites. It's energy in one slide. And again, if you look at where that black arrow is on the top, you can go back 100 years and you can love solar and conservation and wind all you want, but it was just out of the money. It cost more than virtually any carbon-based fuels for ages. And so there was a little adoption, but not a lot. But as you fast forward to about 2020, for the first time, literally in human history, the cost of renewables was less than the cost of the least expensive carbon-based fuels. And at that point in time, pretty much every utility executive on the planet, whether you're in North America, Europe, South America, Asia, it didn't matter. Utility executives were going all renewable because it was the cheapest source out there. Also, parenthetically, the most politically attractive. The missing part to the equation, I know this has been discussed throughout the day, is you've got to have storage, as Bob mentioned, and not just 2 or 3 or 4 hour storage, but ideally longer term storage. But I wanted you to see this chart because in concert with the declining cost of renewable energy, what you see here is the cost curve for batteries going down 90% in the last decade. And if you look forward from here to 2025, no less than Elon Musk and Herbert Diess, the head of Volkswagen, have both said, we're taking the cost of lithium-ion batteries down another 50%. So make no mistake, the whole world is going to renewable energy and power storage. Next, actually stop here for a minute. What's stunning is, go ahead and advance, Sean, it's okay. I was on the board at Tesla in 2010. We needed a lot of lithium-ion batteries. In fact, over 6,000 per car. And we had to make a race to Asia because there literally were no mass lithium-ion producers in the US. And the question was, who would sell us literally millions of lithium-ion batteries? And the answer was, there's only two firms. It was LG Chem back then and Panasonic. SK hadn't even started. So that is where the state of power storage, I should say, the sorry state of power storage was in 2010. Fast forward just 10 years, take a look at what the world looks like. Over close to 200 factories, close to a terawatt of power being produced. All of a sudden, it's not just an Asian game, but a US game, and Europe just getting started. Sean, advance it again just 10 years later. If you look where the world is projected to be in 7.5 years, we're looking at a 5-fold increase. And even with all of this, it only meets half the demand. Make no mistake, we're heading toward the world of an electrification of everything. And that is a great thing for the planet. And you don't have to take my word for it. Take a look at this slide. The auto industry is in complete tumult because Tesla, which when I served on the board, people thought it was a joke. Where would you plug in? There was range anxiety. The firm was never going to get to profitability. I spoke at an event in Dallas 6 years ago, and people said, "Hey, lovely idea, Steve. The firm's never going to make any money." Today, after the 11th consecutive quarter of profitability, Tesla has the highest market cap of any auto and company in the world, in fact, larger than the next 7 combined. And that's not going away. Reason for that is Tesla's not only the most innovative automaker in the world, they're also rapidly becoming the largest energy provider in the world as well, being licensed to provide power in Europe, North America, and China today. Next slide. What I want to switch from is the trends to kind of what are the solutions out there? And a lot of it starts with government. So one, you've got to pass an infrastructure bill. Democrats, Republicans need to get it together. What should you focus on? These are the 6 areas in it. Sean, go ahead and click again. The 4 areas that I think are key are these. Grid resiliency is essential to get to carbon net neutral, but it's one of the most expensive things out there. Government needs to jumpstart it, and they are. Energy efficiency is the lowest hanging fruit. It's one of the easiest things. It's as simple as painting the roofs of as many buildings in the United States as you can as white to reflect the heat from those buildings. But I wanted to focus on the 4 in the middle, because that's where we see the battle to prevent global warming really occurring. So I want to start with power storage. You've already seen the cost down curve. Go to the next slide, Sean. And what I just wanted you to get a sense of is it is key. It underlies everything. At every utility in the future, you will see power storage resident to those wind and solar facilities. You will see power storage in vehicles and in buildings, and we'll move from an energy system where utilities are sending energy to users in a one-way format to what will be an arbitrage based on the time of day between your utility, your vehicle, and the building, because every building in the world essentially will have some form of power wall in it. So to get to carbon net neutral, you're looking at a combination of more sustainable energy, energy efficient vehicles, and green buildings. And I want to give Tesla some credit here, and you may like Elon or hate Elon, that's beside the point. Tesla deserves credit for doing something extraordinary. And that is by providing low-cost power storage for your roof and an electric vehicle, now arguably a lower cost electric vehicle. They're the first company to make the promise of never having to pay a penny for electricity again or gasoline a reality. That's world changing. That's the path we need to be on. And there are entrepreneurs in each of these spaces taking us to the next level. I'm going to go deeper on this crazy thing in the middle. Sean, go to the next slide. What I want you to understand, every auto company in the world is going all electric. And it's a function, again, decreasing lithium ion costs, increasing Gen Z and millennial demand, government mandates and incentives. And what I wanted you to see is the progression here. So how quickly will this happen? literally 24 months ago, GM, actually 18 months ago, General Motors said they'll be all electric by 2035. Revolutionary. People said, my God, that can't happen. Not all electric, right? That's barely over 10 years. Literally 6 months later, Volvo said, we're going to be all electric by 2030. 2 months ago, Stellantis, which is Chrysler and Nissan and so on, said, we're going to be all electric by 2028. And folks, this is just in the last 24 months. So I'm here to tell you, regardless of government regulations, you're not going to be able to find a manufacturer that's going to sell you a non-electric vehicle by 2030. So it's happening that quickly. Why? Because of the cost curve going down and customer demand. Next slide. What I wanted you to see, and I find this to be interesting, you see the International Energy Agency saying, well, it's going to take a while, and by 2030, maybe 20% of cars sold will be electric. And Bloomberg is saying, no, it's going to happen quicker, 40%. Boston Consulting Group, 45%. I'm here to tell you, and go ahead and click again, the numbers are going up all the time. The number to get to carbon net zero is 60%. I believe that will happen well below 2030 based on what we're seeing in the trend line and the pure volume of EVs coming out in concert with the amount of charging stations being put through, and the government stimulus act, energy stimulus will simply add to that. Next slide. I'm also here to tell you, and you may say, gosh, Steve sounds awfully optimistic. I am very optimistic because our venture firm has 22 of the world's largest energy, auto, airline, and smart building companies on the planet, from E.ON and ABB and Volkswagen, Audi in Europe, to China Light and Power and Origin in Asia, and darn near everything else in between. The world is moving faster to renewable energy and EVs and power storage than people realize. But it still may not be enough. The climate patterns are changing more acutely than anybody understood. And if you're in California, no one needs to explain that to you. But the same thing is true in Australia. It's also seeing record fires, Siberia, Alaska, the Pacific Northwest, record floods throughout the eastern part of the country. People like Munich Re and the major insurers in the world with no political skin in the game, simply put, are saying the amount of expenses and payouts we're having to make are getting worse every year. So this is something that should be of concern to everyone. And I wanted to kind of wind up with, it may not be enough to simply do more solar, more wind, more EVs. We're probably going to have to get serious about two new areas. One is sustainable supply chain traceability, and the other is green accounting. And a word about green accounting, some of you, especially the academics, may know that an Italian named Luca Pacioli in the early 1490s developed accounting. It basically put the world of capitalism in warp speed for the first time, because you could properly account for things, buy and sell them more seamlessly. This whole world of green accounting, where every item you buy may have a green premium on it, you will be evaluated in terms of how green the product is. It gets to this issue of sustainable supply chain traceability. We believe in the very near future, just as almost every one of you takes it for granted when you go to the grocery store and you get that carton of milk or the cheese, or God help you, the ice cream, you're going to know what's in it. When you buy products in the future, there will need to be green supply chain traceability on it. We did a global search. That's what venture capitalists do, for the company that was the leader. We found the global leader. It happened to be in London. I was praying it was in Silicon Valley, so now I'm on a lot of planes to London. And part of the reason we knew they were the leader, aside from pretty clearly having the best product, is that they already had major firms like Volvo, BHP, Jaguar, Boeing, CATL, that thing on the bottom left, I can't say the name, but one of the largest smartphone providers in the world, as customers. And when you see a customer list like that, you know you probably have the industry leader. But just make a note, every company in the world is going to have to say how green their supply chain is. The EU is putting standards together as we speak. Congress will be doing the same thing over the next 2 or 3 years. Huge step in the right direction. Next slide. Some of you know that, again, even with all of this, it may not be enough. And I wanted to say a quick word about carbon capture, direct air capture, and so on. Massive amounts of money are going into these areas from the venture community, because a lot of these things are simply put out of the money. And if we get to that inflection point where the climate starts getting worse, and simply reducing our carbon output is not enough, but we need to massively be sucking carbon out of the atmosphere. There are new technologies to do that. I was just in Zurich, where Climeworks is. The rub with these technologies, and they're extraordinary. And by the way, if you think this looks like a lot of hair dryers laid on their side at massive scale, you're right, except they simply put suck the air in and the carbon with it instead of blowing it out. The costs here are enormous. We've got to drive that down. But this is where the world goes if we don't quite get there soon enough, on the other hand. And that will happen likely in concert with a major carbon tax. Politicians, of which I've been one, around the world are hesitant to do that. People generally don't want to hear about taxes. But if you're seeing the world getting hotter in a hurry, expect us to go this direction. So what's happening, what I want to give you a sense is, when you get serious about solving global warming, you have to understand the technology, the government role, and the costs, because they all come together. And things like Climeworks and direct air capture are a great solution, but they're hugely expensive, and you may need a way to pay for it. One of the best could be a carbon tax, to tax the greatest polluters and use that to suck up the effluent they're creating. So that's view from Silicon Valley in a nutshell. I just wanted to close with a couple simple slides. Sean, go ahead. Some of you may have heard, I've been doing this for 15 years, and it was shockwaves came out of Wall Street, because Silicon Valley has been onto this issue of renewable energy. I served on the board of Tesla 10 years ago, where even Larry Fink, the head of BlackRock, has said the next 1,000 unicorns aren't going to be in search engines or social media. They're going to be in green energy and ways to decarbonize the world. I think he's right. But let me show you the next slide. I want to bring this to reality. That's a projection, maybe a crazy projection for the future. I want you to see what's happened in the last 15 years. When we started our venture fund, I said, we're going to be a leader in clean energy. And people said, Steve, that sounds lovely, but show me the billion-dollar unicorns. This doesn't sound like we make a lot of money investing in software. We make a lot of money in biotech. But show us the billion-dollar unicorns in clean tech. The slide you see before you was empty. There were no financial successes in the sector in 2007. Today, fast forward just 15 years, and you see over a dozen companies that are billion-dollar unicorns. If you look closely, over half of them are decacorns. And Tesla, as you know, has flirted with being a trillion-dollar company. And I'm here to say flat out, within the next year, their valuation will be back over $1 trillion, because simply put, they're growing faster than any auto company in the world by a lot, and they're profitable. And that doesn't even account for them being on their path to becoming one of the larger energy companies. So this isn't just conjecture, it's happening. In the minute firms like ours can show the world you can make money investing in cleaning up the world, generally speaking, will be a path to your door. Which brings us to the last slide. My dad always told me, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And in the 1960s or 70s, that was probably great advice, because things didn't change very quickly. It's terrible advice for today, because a lot is broke, especially with our climate and the way we power our world. The new mantra for all of us is, if you're not busy cannibalizing your own business, someone else will. And to all the people at the Caltech conference today, I hope you will become part of this new world that's helping to cannibalize the old world that may have provided power for billions of people, but was not very kind to the planet. We can do better. Innovators, many of whom have graduated from Caltech, are leading the way. We're happy to be financing them. There's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur. And I hope the next great firms are started in California, in the US, and around the world. And we're open for business. We need to get the world to carbon net neutral. We don't have a day to waste. Thank you.
Steve, great. Thank you so much for the talk. We have a couple of questions queued up here, but we do have some time. So if anybody else listening wants to throw a question into the Q&A, we'll get to as many of them as we can before we run out of time. So the first one is about a carbon tax. You started talking about that right near the end in conjunction with the idea that somehow or other we need to figure a way to pay for negative emissions technologies. Maybe you could talk a little bit further. This gets away from your role as a venture investor and starting to sort of speculate on how government policy and individual consumer preferences might push us into this space. But what needs to be done to accomplish a sort of carbon tax at a level that will really incentivize the kind of learning and growth that we need to see from the negative emissions world?
You bet. I'm happy to put my political hat back on. Simply put, a carbon tax is the most efficient, elegant solution. Tax the people who are creating the most pollution. So two things need to happen. One, it's the easy part, and that is to establish the international standard for what that tax should be. The Trump administration wanted to peg it at $6, which really wouldn't have much impact on anything. Most experts agree that it's a number probably in the $100 range per kiloton of carbon out of the atmosphere. Once you get to that level, that changes things in a hurry. The missing part is political courage and backbone, because if you run for office, and I've held public office, no one wants to hear the word taxes. But as climate conditions become more acute, if we can change the narrative from a tax on people who are already feeling overtaxed to taxes on the people who are despoiling our environment and making our planet unsafe, I think there's a narrative there that hopefully can get Democrats and Republicans together. If the academics and people in the private sector can help come up with a universally agreed upon number, again, I'm guessing it's somewhere in the $100, €100 range. That is a huge, huge step forward. I wish it could happen tomorrow. Next question.
Great. Yeah, just to sort of follow up on that quickly, we've seen action in just in the last year or even less from companies. I think most notably Stripe had put together this consortium of largely big tech companies that are willing to pay large uneconomic amounts for carbon removal in order to try and drive down the cost curve. Do you think that there's a private sector position that can actually completely take the place of the government intervention on a tax, or in the end, is it just a question of getting the price down to the point where a tax might be palatable?
Look, we need both. And by the way, I said in a perfect world, $100 is about the right number. You probably don't do that overnight. You probably would phase that in, starting with 25 and having it grow perhaps in $10 increments over a 10-year period. So business has the time to account for that and make the necessary changes. Second, the Frontier Fund that Stripe and Meta and others have done, it is a great thing. It is a step forward. They're talking about doing billion-dollar commitments. That's outstanding. It's nowhere near enough. But a journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. So I appreciate them rounding up a lot of people. But to do things in the size and scale that I expect will be necessary, we're going to need governments to get involved. But again, it all starts with the science, the numbers. What is that right number to get to? But the more companies that stand up and pony up, and we're advising a lot of our companies today to do this, even if it is just for marketing purposes, because it's paying a lot of money to suck carbon out of the atmosphere at a number that is way, way too high to make a difference today. But gee whiz, the first electric cars didn't work that well either. Someone had to pay to subsidize it. We wouldn't have the internet if it wasn't for DARPA. It all that journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first step. So I appreciate those firms doing it. We're encouraging some of our LPs to follow on, and I want to see how quickly that grows. But this is one where government is going to need to help, not just America's government, but Western Europe as well.
Great. So next question here is, do you have any current prospects for investment in the important but historically unsexy sector of the building energy efficiency world?
I used to work at the Department of Energy and the Office of Conservation and Solar. That was all I worked on for years of my life. Building energy efficiency is the lowest hanging fruit. I think it's sexy, but I'm an anomaly. There are all sorts of fascinating building energy efficiency companies. We've invested in some. It is a big area in our book. If you have great business plans there, send them to me. By the way, that's sort of half the equation. The other thing that's equally I think exciting is healthy buildings, what's now called building wellness. And again, it's not so long ago my dad smoked. People are smoking in the office. They thought that was great. Today, that doesn't cut it. And building wellness is a big space. The two go together. We're looking for opportunities in both of them. It's a key part of making our world cleaner.
Great. I have a quick question here. We've heard a lot about things that can operate at the gigaton scale on time to make a difference on the scale of what we're talking about in this conference. So do you believe that a new startup company that's created today is capable of scaling up and operating at that gigaton scale by 2030?
Yes. And that's because I've worked for two companies, eBay, that went from nothing to a $30 billion company over the course of 4 years. We can do that. In the old world, that was very hard to do, but now we can. I also worked for a firm called Tesla. People laughed at me when I said I was investing in an electric car company, that nitwit, in San Carlos, California, going to displace Detroit. You've got to be kidding me. Today, just one of Tesla's factories in Fremont is the largest auto manufacturer in the United States today that didn't even exist, a company that barely made its first car 10 years ago. So if you get the right combination, you can do it quickly. But there's one other quick point I want to add to this. To win here, it's not just about developing large manufacturing facilities quickly, like solar and wind. It is about, so it's not just about producing electrons more cost effectively. It is about managing the electricity more efficiently. And right now, as you know, we've got colossal peaks and troughs in the energy demand cycle every day. We're getting better all the time at cutting the tops of the demand off with low-cost power storage and smoothing those out. If you can do that, you save a lot. Here's one other just quick cause for hope that I love. I think all of you know, and I always laugh at this, that in Jimmy Carter's time, I was there, the cafe standards were roughly 26 miles per gallon. And the Chamber of Commerce, the Republican Party, and they said, our president is a socialist and he's a job killer to boot. I'm not sure which was worse. Nothing changed for 30 years. People wouldn't touch the issue, and President Obama came along. I'm the rare guy who's old enough to remember both. And he said, we're going to raise cafe standards 26 miles per gallon to roughly, I think, 35. And again, they said, he's a socialist and a job killer. We're not sure which one is worse. Now, 30 years to see the miles per gallon standard change 9 miles is pathetic. We've got to be moving faster. We've got to be more aspirational. Elon Musk comes along with the first Model S, 97 mile per gallon equivalent. Now, I appreciate there's no gas tank and there's no internal combustion engine, but the BTU conversion, 97 miles per gallon. What I find so interesting is not only is the Model 3 up at about 123 miles per gallon, but while some states like Wyoming, largely coal-based utilities, that number compresses down to like 50 or 60 miles per gallon. That ain't bad. But the good news is you get utilities like California, where the utility mix is heavily skewed toward renewable energy. The miles per gallon equivalent goes way over 200 and approaching a 300 mile per gallon equivalent. So this electric vehicle thing is big. We just need to do a better job of getting more efficient batteries and then learning how to recycle them efficiently so we don't have to do crazy things like harvesting our ocean floors or reopening too many dangerous mines in places close to where we live.
Great. Thank you again, Steve. This was a phenomenal talk. Thank you for the view and the things you've invested in and what you're looking forward to seeing.